Hello, I'm Robert Emmett Hernan. I'm head of Bluestack Productions, Inc., the publisher of Irish Environment, an online resource for environmental matters on the island of Ireland. We're here today for another in our series of conversations on environmental matters, and I'm very happy today to welcome Dr. Liam Lysaght. Well, Liam, you're welcome.
Thank you very much, Bob.
Liam is the director of the National Biodiversity Data Center in Ireland, and I'm going to first ask Liam if you would give the audience a sense of what your background is.
Well, I come from a background of politics, sociology and geography. That's what I've done with primary degree, and I've moved into the conservation field straight out of college. I worked with the National Parks and Wildlife as a park ranger, and then I moved into the policy area with a statutory council in Ireland called the Heritage Council, and from there then I moved into the help establishing this National Biodiversity Data Centre.
And I wonder, Liam, if you could give the audience a sense of what the centre is and what it does.
Well, the centre is essentially an archive for natural heritage, I think is the best way to describe it. We're trying to collate data, information on Ireland's biodiversity, that's our natural environment, bringing it together in one source where it's available, but also feeding it out. We're applying information communications technology to try to make that information, feeding it back to potential users. So we have a big internet presence in terms of data and mapping. That's in a nutshell really what we do. And
it's a large part of it is using the internet these days for disseminating that information, is it not?
That's right, because I think what we do very well, I think what natural historians do very well is they do the natural history particularly well. Very good at assembling information, but what has been missing really is the application of technologies to actually make more use of that. And the data centre, we bring the ecological side and the information communication technology sides together, so we have a state-of-the-art development really to try to make use of that information that we have in Ireland.
And the key word in the title is it's the data center. That is, you're less involved with conservation movement or with monitoring, or is there some monitoring function within the center?
Well, what we tend not to do is lobby or in that regard. What we're trying to do is to be a scientific center to provide scientific and unbiased information to policymakers or conservationists. It's a resource for them to use in terms of information, and that's really what we're trying to do. It's the data side of it, the factual information we want to try to mobilise. Biodiversity data, there's a need for it across the board in terms of influencing obviously conservation management, conservation policy, but even to feed into the planning process and to track things like how we're achieving in some of the large other policies like sustainability policies and the like. So there's a real need for actually having information to support the implementation of these policies and just track what's happening in the countryside.
The mapping system, how is that going? That's still in a developmental process?
It's still in the development phase. Just as we speak, we're just in the middle of releasing the second version of this, which will be greatly enhanced. What we had to begin with, I think, was quite. It was state of the art, but it's 2 years in existence, and there was a number of key elements of functionality that we knew had to be introduced, and they're only been implemented now. I suppose the key thing about it is that if you're a specialist and if you're interested in querying, let's say, the data by a species level, it's very adequate. But if for most uses, what you're interested in is about defining an area that you're interested in and knowing what's of value in that area. That's what we call an area-based querier. And that element of the system is currently being worked on, and we're quite excited about what it's going to be like in terms of its usability. Within, after the end of the summer and the end of August, we'll have this new system up, and then we feel we're really open for business because we're providing a facility, a service to local authorities, for example. Whether it be some of the large state bodies, we can tell them really about what's known about a parcel of land and its biodiversity value, and that's, I think, what's really going to change conservation management or planning in Ireland.
With that mapping system, it makes it more accessible for the wider public, and not just governmental agencies, but people could find out what's going on with the biodiversity in their particular area.
Well, that's exactly right. A systemic weakness that we had in biodiversity. We're actually quite well endowed with information on Ireland's biodiversity. Now we could do with a lot more. There's a lot more information, but for the last 300 years, people have been collecting detailed and scientific information about Ireland's biodiversity. But it was bedeviled by not having that information accessible. It wasn't available in the correct format for people who could use the data. So we really embarked on a very large exercise of trying to bring those data together, digitize them in many cases, but where they're available digitally, bring them together, bring them into a common database with common standards, and feed that out. And whether, if it's good quality data, whether it's to be used by research community, key policy makers, or whether it's just your interest in your own locality and you have an interest in knowing more about what's special about the area. Once the data is fed back in this mapping format, it's accessible and it can be used by anyone.
Terrific. So I invite people to go look at it in the fall when it's available. That's terrific.
That's right.
Recent State of the Knowledge report that you did in 2010, which was the first inventory of biodiversity data.
Yes.
And what, in general terms, what was the kind of findings in terms of number of species and habitats that you were finding?
Well, as you mentioned, it's the first time that we've brought together or collated what was known about the state of not the state, but what we knew about what biodiversity resource was in Ireland. It's quite interesting that we had an international and a national and a European target to halt biodiversity loss, but of course the first stage would surely to know what that resource is. And we found, we've now quantified that there's a minimum of 31,000 species in Ireland. Of course, there's maybe as many as 15,000 more that we know are there, but haven't yet been documented. These are mostly a lot with algae and fungi, some of these groups. And I think we have over 100 different types of habitats, discrete habitat types. And perhaps it's not surprising, but what's interesting for people is that the bulk of our biodiversity is in the invertebrates. About 60% of of our biodiversity resources invertebrates, and of course that's quite an interesting issue, because what we can engage with, or what people are more accessible to, is they understand the need to conserve mammals, birds, of course. Bird conservation is very high. Even the botanical side, people can engage on that, but that's really only the tip of the iceberg in terms of the biodiversity, and it's the huge diversity in terms of the lower plant groups and invertebrates. They're the elements that actually make systems function. And one of the big things about biodiversity and the conservation is now we're talking about this concept of goods and services. Trying to conserve the polar bear or not, there's debate about you can engage with the public on this. But biodiversity is actually the driver behind a lot of, let's say, the economic benefits that we have in Ireland. The agricultural sector is dependent on clean water, properly functioning soil, fertile soil, fresh air. These are all aspects of goods and services that provide biodiversity. So we have to try to understand, the driving forces behind it.
One of the figures I saw reported in the State of Knowledge is that the biodiversity was worth about 2.6 billion euros.
That's right.
In goods and services, or natural services. I wonder if you could give the audience a little flavor of what that means and how was it calculated. It's become quite a big issue, and there's a recent UK National Ecosystem Assessment, which is beginning to try and do that over there, and this is the first step here. So I wonder if you could kind of give the audience a sense of how does one come up with that number, 2.6 billion?
Well, with great difficulty, I suppose, is the truth, and in many ways it's a guesstimate. I think it's important to do that. But that figure, 2.6 billion per annum to the Irish economy, is a figure from our own Department of the Environment. So it's an important figure. It's not just it's not plucked out of fresh air. But essentially, what has happened is that an economist has gone through the different sectors of economic sectors and saying what aspects of these services are provided by biodiversity. Again, I made the example of the humble bumblebee. That provides a kind of hidden service to society in terms of pollination. That's the horticultural sector in Ireland is worth about 85 million, I think. And without the action of bees pollinating, you wouldn't have a horticultural sector. One of our greatest resources, and one that actually we overlook, is our soil biodiversity. We have a very, very fertile soil in Ireland. We grow fantastic grass, and of course we have a whole grass-based beef system on top of that, and the whole dairy. We couldn't avail of this resource unless you had the goods and services of the soil microbes and organisms actually creating this fertility.